There are concepts that marred our formative years due to their outlandish nature. The ideas were dismissed as mere fantasies, but as the truth begins to spill out, we learn just how true paranoid delusions were. And now, our history is marred by something far more sinister than a mere conspiracy theory. Number 10. If war wasn't enough to disfigure our past, fear-mongering and propaganda were also added to the mix. It was just after the Second World War that the Democratic United States and the Communist Soviet Union found themselves in another conflict. The political and economic clash was dubbed the Cold War, a name that highlighted an intense rivalry between two world superpowers. From 1947, the global geopolitical rivalry pressed on, increasing fear of nuclear annihilation and intensifying proxy wars. The Cold War didn't end until the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. During those 44 years, much would happen, including the development of advanced weapons, the space race, and the Red Scare. The Red Scare was a hysteria, fear-mongering in the form of a conspiracy theory. The scare was the fear over the perceived threat posed by communists in the US amid the Cold War. It led to a range of actions that would have a profound impact on the government and society as a whole. Federal employees would be analyzed extensively in order to deem them trustworthy and loyal to the House Un-American Activities Committee, with the United States Senator Joseph R. McCarthy investigating allegations of inflammatory aspects within the government, as well as the film industry. The first Red Scare, Reds being the communist under the allegiance of the Red Soviet flag, first began in the wake of the First World War and bled into the Cold War era, when concerns were raised that there were communists and sympathizers inside the United States that may be working as Soviet spies, posing a great threat to American security. The idea itself was not unfounded, though. The USSR had long carried out espionage within American borders, often with the aid of its citizens, particularly amid the Second World War. As the Cold War began to heat up, the government began to employ various means of exposing communists working inside the federal government. The fear would continue to mount through the 44 years, and it wasn't helped by the fear-mongering set forth by congressional investigator Senator McCarthy. He would use hearsay and intimidation, which would establish him as a feared figure in American politics. His reign of terror against celebrities, intellectuals, or anyone who challenged his views would continue to fan the flames of a growing hysteria and conservatism. The advancement of communism, beginning in 1949, further heightened concerns among American citizens that there was real danger of Reds taking over their country, as so spread by McCarthy and even J. Edgar Hoover. Together, they would intensify the idea of the possibility that there were Soviets present within the US who were going to take over the country, or at least greatly influence it. The Red Scare subsequently intensified for years until McCarthy's colleagues ended his reign of terror in 1954. It was only in the late 50s that the climate of repression and fear would begin to ease off. Still, the claims made by the senator hung over the political industry of the US. He alleged that numerous Soviet spies and sympathizers had infiltrated not only the government, but also the film industry and universities. McCarthy, of course, was viewed as a fear-mongerer who only sought to instill fear in many to bolster his political career. But in recent years, as more classified papers have been publicized, we may find that some theorists, such as McCarthy, may not have been too far off the mark. In recent years, the Venona papers revealed something truly alarming that made McCarthy look less insane. It turned out that in February of 1943, a group known as the U.S. Army Signal Intelligence Service, the forerunner to the NSA, undertook a project that would intercept and analyze signal traffic that the Soviet Union was sending. The operation was codenamed Venona. It's only recently that the NSA started to release portions of the voluminous files on the project itself. What those documents hold has drastically changed the way we view the Cold War era, including propaganda and claims that were made during the period. The partially declassified Venona project ultimately revealed how the Soviet Union truly did penetrate the United States government, which was under the administration of Franklin D. Roosevelt. Communism had additionally infiltrated the American military and national defense industries. Venona transcripts, essentially revealed the existence of Soviet espionage in various sectors of America from as early as the First World War. Authorities were only able to successfully identify 125 of the 350 Soviet spies that were working within the American government. Even so, the Venona Project and its declassification would reveal a major espionage conspiracy and place McCarthy's Red Scare fear-mongering conspiracy right on the mark. Number 9. Nestled in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, is one of the nation's greatest resorts, which has a history dating back to the Civil War era. It was used throughout the war by both the North and South. The Greenbrier Resort became a sanctuary in later years and continued to evolve. But it would also be this famous resort that would become the center of whispered rumors and shadowy secrets. Starting in the early 1960s, a strange narrative was being passed through the grapevine, one that spoke of the government sticking its fingers in the popular destination. Suggestions of an alleged secret bunker escaped the mouths of employees, and soon anyone and everyone in the vicinity was talking about it. They theorized that the sneaky American government had created a top-secret bunker right beneath Greenbrier's hotel. The talk was prompted by a random construction that took place just before the start of the 60s. The construction project had been started, unprovoked, by the government. In 1957, they decided that a new wing should be added to the hotel, and the building of the West Virginia wing commenced that following year. Even though the government maintained that nothing strange was going on, and they were simply adding an additional wing onto the hotel, where conferences were regularly held, locals and employees remained suspicious. At first, it would seem ludicrous to assume that the construction of an additional wing was just a cover for something much more sinister. But in recent years, those whispered words seemed to hold more weight than anyone could have imagined. The new building at the Greenbrier Resort took place amid the strenuous Cold War. It was no doubt random and certainly suspicious. It was a $14 million project, one that saw the use of an enormous hull, vast amounts of concrete that arrived by the truckload daily, huge steel doors, and the odd installation of 110 urinals without reason. But there was a reason, and the purpose of it wouldn't be revealed until 1992 by the Washington Post. It was that year that an article was publicized concerning the 1957 reconstruction of the hotel. Many questions had been left unanswered, and conspiracy theories abound, leading to further investigation and ultimately exposure. The Washington Post disclosed the real reason behind the building addition, confirming the suspicions that employees and locals latched onto for years. Beneath the West Virginia wing of the Greenbrier Hotel was a secret bunker. For more than 30 years, the government kept it a secret. They'd built an entire house beneath the hotel that would be occupied by the U.S. Congress and their staff in the event of full-on nuclear war. The facility was 2 football fields in size, with 18 dormitories that could accommodate 60 people. A cafeteria was instituted too, one that could seat 400 people. A power plant allowed for purified air and power. Decontamination showers and a subterranean hospital ward were among the features. The self-sustaining bunker would allow for enough food and fuel for at least 2 months at a time. Number 8. Stories regarding rogue waves popped into existence as far back as the 19th century. It appears that the legends stemmed from one French explorer and a naval officer named Jules Dumont d'Urville. He'd already made a name for himself through botany, cartography, and sailing around the world. Yet Dumont's fame has been marred by something else. In a bold claim, the explorer alleged that he'd seen rogue waves over 100 feet tall while on his voyages. His claim had been bolstered by several eyewitnesses who were with him during these circumstances, yet no one would believe him. In fact, Prime Minister François Arago publicly ridiculed him. Skeptics based their doubts on the scientific consensus that waves the size of Dumont's description simply didn't exist. The standard models that were used by oceanographers, engineers, and meteorologists predicted wave height, which was used to rule out the possibility of giant rogue waves. The 19th century also saw very few eyewitness accounts, possibly due to the fact that they wouldn't make it back to shore after encountering such intense oceanic conditions. But in the 20th century, the conspiracy of the existence of rogue waves returned. With the evolution of steel-hulled ships, mariners were able to make it back to shore and recount their experience. The number of potential rogue wave survivors saw a dramatic increase that century, as did the number of sightings. Still, these freak waves were dismissed as nothing more than nautical folklore. Each time that mariners would retell their encounter, they were met with skepticism and alleged scientific debunkings. Then, in 1964, a Scottish oceanographer named Lawrence Draper wrote the first ever scientific article about what he called freak waves. In this article, he discussed the efforts made by the National Institute of Oceanography to record wave heights. He also detailed an analysis of the recordings made by a British weather ship, where the highest recorded wave was 67 feet. In 1971, Draper wrote another article in which he stated that the once ridiculed old sailor stories of enormous waves had been confirmed in modern research. He specified that such monstrous occurrences can happen. Even with Draper's research compiled into various articles and publicized, the concept was still met with much skepticism. The 1st of January, 1995, though, marked the dawn of a new era, an era in which rogue waves were real. It was that day that the first real measurement of a rogue wave occurred, and it was recorded by a laser detector situated on the Dropner oil drilling platform, 100 miles off the coast of Norway. The platform was built to withstand a wave of 64 feet, but this wave, dubbed the Dropner wave, measured a whopping 85 feet, with characteristics that didn't fit any previous wave records. In 2000, a British ship called the RRS Discovery recorded an even higher rogue wave, measuring 95 feet off the coast of Scotland. Despite stories about monstrous freak waves, scientists have only begun to accept the concept in the last few decades. Through further research, they were able to determine that these random forming waves were twice the size of the ones surrounding them. They're unpredictable and can often appear unexpectedly from any direction, regardless of wind. Most new scientific reports describe them as walls of water with steep sides and deep troughs. Through various studies, scientists concluded that as many as 10 rogues can be forming in the ocean at any given moment. Number 7. We've all seen those white streaks trailing behind the jets as they zoom across the sky. Through a natural process of condensation, these contrails appear. They're formed when water vapor condenses and then freezes around an aircraft, specifically around its exhaust. Despite this scientific explanation, conspiracy theorists have suggested an alternative: chemtrails. This conspiracy theory is among the most well-known crazy concepts out there. The well-established idea posits that the trails were actually chemicals being sprayed on citizens by the very government that we trust with our lives. It may seem like a far-fetched narrative, but you can't really blame them. The chemtrail conspiracy theory is reminiscent of a time in which the government really was spraying chemicals on its citizens. The United States has been found guilty of testing chemicals and bioweapons on its very own country, not once but several times. In fact, the number keeps growing as more and more previously covert projects and operations are being exposed and declassified. In fact, numerous other theories, such as weather manipulation and mind control, have stemmed from the same subset. One such previously classified covert mass chemical testing was Operation LAC, or Operation Large Area Coverage. In the 1950s, the United States found itself in a standoff with the Soviet Union, bringing us back to the era of the Cold War. Of course, the government of the United States needed to be ready for absolutely anything. Chemical attacks, nuclear warfare, or physical bombardments were the aspects that gave them a reason to install a nuclear bunker beneath a notable resort. It also seemed that the threat of chemical or bio-warfare gave the government the justification to start creating their own chemical weaponry. Of course, you can't have such weapons without running them through sufficient tests to ensure that they would do the intended job. During the time that the US began developing these weapons, they didn't have access to the Russian cities where they would otherwise have tested them. Launching a chemical attack on their enemies would have thrown them into a full-blown war, so the government had to find another way to test their biochemical weaponry. So they turned to America's very own population. Between 1957 and 1958, Operation LAC was employed by the United States Army Chemical Corps and the Air Force. These two organizations would work together to release a spray of chemicals over a large area populated by American citizens. The project saw the release of microscopic zinc-cadmium sulfide particles, or ZNCDs, over several cities. Making use of a CD-119 flying boxcar, the military released tons of potentially hazardous materials on its own citizens. While the chemical is relatively harmless initially, long-term exposure can lead to serious medical conditions and has even recently been linked to the development of cancer. Just among the few listed issues are kidney impairment, bone weakness, and respiratory tract infection. Operation LAC wasn't limited to just planes. The military would also station themselves on top of high-rise buildings in cities and install blowers on them. The blowers would then emit the chemical that they were testing over the immediate area. Those high-rise buildings weren't just random skyscrapers, they were tall apartment buildings where people lived, and schools that children would attend. They would even place blowers in station wagons to spread the chemicals closer to the ground. The tests were supposedly designed to determine the dispersion and geographic range of biological and chemical agents. Ground-based stations would track the fluorescent particles to determine the dispersion range, but it also caused respiratory issues and weakness in Americans. Number 6. It began in the fall of 1977. One by one, they began to disappear. Women, men, and children began inexplicably vanishing from Japan's coastal towns. First, it was a security guard taking the day off at the beach. He never returned home that September. Just 2 months later, a student was on her way back from school. She never made it home either, and was last seen just 800 feet away from her destination. The following year, in July, a couple disappeared from a local lover's lane. Their vehicle was found with no signs of a struggle and no indications of foul play. That same month, another couple would disappear too. They'd been riding their bicycles near a beach on their way to watch a fireworks display. These unexplainable disappearances were so odd that local newspapers began comparing them to alien abductions. Some wondered if there was a homicidal maniac on the loose. They even began to come up with personalized theories. They guessed that the couple just took off, that the student had run away, or that the security guard willingly disappeared. Some even theorized that Japanese citizens disappearing was part of a much larger plot. In fact, a handful of people suggested that North Korea was secretly kidnapping them. It was certainly a wild conspiracy theory, outlandish and lacking in support. Little did these conspiracy theorists know just how right they truly were. The concept of secret abductions was already long held by the time the truth was exposed. Between 1977 and 1983, hundreds of Japanese citizens went missing from the coastal towns of the East Asian country. It's uncertain as to how the theorists arrived at their conclusion, but it seemed too implausible to be true, leading to skepticism and subsequently a slow reaction. North Korea itself consistently denied being behind the abductions since they began. Still, many citizens pointed at North Korean government agents, claiming that they were taking Japanese citizens for nefarious reasons. Tongryeon and the Japanese Socialist Party further backed North Korea and considered the abduction rumors to be nothing more than a myth, a conspiracy theory. For years, people continued to disappear, and the government lied, denied, and dismissed the claims. But the conspiracy theory wasn't a myth at all, and the truth was exposed in 2002. That year, North Korean leader Kim Jong-il admitted that the country had in fact illegally abducted as many as 13 Japanese citizens. Today, there are 17 individuals who Japanese authorities have recognized as missing citizens, but that number could run well into the hundreds. 5 of the 17 recognized citizens were returned to Japan, but the country is still seeking answers. North Korea apologized and promised to ensure that nothing like this would happen in the future, but an explanation was never secured. It's widely believed that the reason behind the abductions was for victims to teach Japanese to North Korean spy schools, where spies could then be introduced in Japan, undercover, appearing as other Japanese residents. Other speculations suggest that the victims were brainwashed instead to be deployed as spies themselves, or they would serve in groups and work to destabilize the country. The reason behind the abductions of South Korean and Japanese citizens, though, remains a mystery today. Number 5. Operation LAC wasn't the only time that the United States unleashed biochemical weapons testing upon its citizens. Numerous scenarios are recently being declassified, telling the story of chemical testing as so theorized by an estranged group of people. Another project reminiscent of chemical testing was the combined Project 112 and Project Shad, or Shipboard Hazard and Defense. Again, taking us back to the Cold War era, the United States launched Project 112, another covert mission designed to test biological and chemical weaponry. It began in 1962 and ran until 1973, allowing the government to study how their biological agents behaved in different conditions, notably on land and at sea. Branching off from the initial project was Project Shad, which involved around 6,000 service members, most of whom were either from the Navy and Army, and a few were from the Marines or the Air Force. This project sought to conduct chemical tests under the display of defense research, but it turned out that not all 6,000 or so individuals who took part in the chemical tests were aware of what they were doing. Many of them had no knowledge that they were working with or in close proximity to dangerous agents. A since-retired Navy officer named Jack Alderson is the one who blew the whistle on the operation, claiming that many of those involved didn't know what they were doing and that they were being exposed to potentially harmful weapons. Alderson also accused the military, under the direction of the U.S. government, of unleashing chemical agents upon the crews aboard ships in the middle of the ocean. They also allegedly used some incredibly harsh decontamination products. Alderson would take his accusations to Congress, claiming that the exposure led to long-term health effects among the 6,000 or so men involved. Various studies were subsequently launched, and the claims were thoroughly investigated. Citing Public Law 107-314, information on covert missions had to be publicized. The documents relating to the experiments were deliberately withheld from the public eye, and even today, a lot of Project 112 and Project Shad remains shrouded in mystery. But in 2000, the Department of Defense began declassifying the records regarding the project and the effects that it had on those involved. So it seemed that the chemtrail conspiracy theorists were right again, except this time, the government turned against their own military personnel, not even informing them that they were working with potentially dangerous chemicals. Number 4. Often referred to as the Southsider, the Chicago White Sox began their league of success in the late 1800s as the Sioux City Cornhuskers. The American professional baseball team would go on to win 3 World Series, 2 of which were in the 1900s, and the third being 88 years later. But through their largely successful run, the White Sox's history has been marred by one event. It was an event that would only be confirmed after wild conspiracies and outlandish rumors had spun out in the wake of the 1919 World Series. It was the 1st of October that year when the baseball team filed onto the field, overlooked by observers who believed they were one of the best teams ever. The opening game of the World Series saw the playoff between the Cincinnati Reds and the White Sox. No one would have expected the Cincinnati Reds to win. In the past 2 decades, leading up to the 1919 World Series, they often ranked at the bottom of National League standings. That year, though, a new manager and other additions would also allow the Reds to take a 9-game lead over the New York Giants. They would also win the National League pennant. Despite this sudden turnaround, no one thought that the Reds would win and believed that the White Sox could easily win the championship. But the Sox didn't win. Instead, they were beaten 9-1, a shocking defeat that would mark the start of a bad omen. The Sox would lose the series 5-3. It seemed impossible to observers and fans, so impossible that several theories began to emerge from the woodwork. Talks of a fixed game began to do the rounds in Chicago. It didn't seem out of the realm of possibility. In every sport, there's bound to be at least one scandal. Despite the rumors, though, many found themselves shocked and disappointed when the truth was finally revealed. The sporting world is more than just a few matches between opposing teams, and is certainly more than just winning. It has for a long time been a money-making scheme for professional gamblers. The odds at this point were favoring the White Sox, given that the Red had seen low ranks previously. Those professional gamblers saw this as an opportunity to make quite a bit of cash by betting on the underdog. All they needed was assistance from the better team players. When the White Sox lost the league, many could only wonder why, and hope that those rumors were nothing more than just that. But a year later, disappointed fans would discover just how right those guesses were. It was found that in September of 1919, several players had agreed to receive a sum of $100,000 to underperform, which would allow professional gamblers to make a massive profit on bets. Number 3. The United States wasn't the only country testing biochemical weapons on its citizens. It also wasn't the only country submerged in unrest and mistreatment. Located at the bottommost point of the African continent is South Africa, with coastlines stretching across the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. Despite being rich in biodiversity, fauna, and flora, it wasn't always the welcoming country as so viewed today. Apartheid was a racial segregation and discrimination system enforced in the country when the National Party codified it as state policy. It wasn't until the early 90s that the system would finally be dismantled. But during those 46 years, something more sinister than discrimination was at play, and it was called Project Coast, a covert chemical and biological weapons program. Officially, Project Coast began in 1981 under the guise of crowd control agents and defensive chemical and biological gear. In practice, though, the project focused more on the production of poison that could be used to assassinate state enemies, either within or outside of the country, laying the foundation of a potential discriminatory massacre. The operation was both conceived and carried out beyond the usual financial, political, and military control. In fact, Project Coast functioned on the basis of several front companies, personal relationships, and illicit transactions. The South African government, though, didn't make use of the controversial, disputed disease-causing ZNCDs. They used outright lethal agents like mustard gas and another chemical which caused corrosive skin and tissue injury. But among such chemicals, the government also sought to produce non-lethal agents to aid in suppressing internal dissent. This would ultimately lead to the use of recreational narcotics, along with medicinal narcotics. Investigations were made into these narcotics as a form of incapacitating agent. MDMA was essentially manufactured in large quantities and weaponized into dust that could be released into a rioting crowd. Biological weapons were also being produced simultaneously, one of which made use of black mamba venom, one of the most venomous snakes in South Africa. Research was also conducted into the use of E. coli as a potential bioweapon. Employment of these biochemical weapons was easy, and they weren't used for crowd control as initially stated. The Civil Cooperation Bureau directed the operations where the agents were released into the water supply in 1989. The water supply of Dobra, a refugee camp, was infected with yellow fever and cholera. Another contamination took place later that same year but failed due to high chlorine contact in the treated water supply at the camp. The government's focus on riot control quite clearly switched to outright discriminatory massacre. It was no longer considered a biochemical weapons test, but appeared to be a direct attempt to slaughter a large portion of the population. Number 2. The British ocean liner, the RMS Lusitania, was owned by Cunard Line and built to compete in the transatlantic passenger trade. The vessel was launched in June of 1906, at the time being named the largest ship in the world, weighing over 30,000 tons. Although the ship was most certainly luxurious, it was more noted for its speed, which allowed it to win the blue ribbon for the fastest Atlantic crossing, averaging 24 knots. In May of 1915, the Lusitania headed back to Liverpool from New York, carrying 1,959 passengers and crew. Around that time, the sinking of merchant ships off the coast of Ireland had been reported, prompting the Admiralty to warn the ship, tell the captain to avoid the area, and also adopt the zigzagging tactic to confuse U-boats. But the captain of the ship ignored the warning, and that afternoon a torpedo struck the midships, causing an explosion, and a heavier explosion soon followed, damaging the steam engines and pipes. Just 20 minutes later, the Lusitania had sunk, and with it, its passengers, including 128 United States citizens. A German U-boat had been responsible for the maritime disaster. The sinking of the Lusitania prompted the abandoning of the United States' neutrality and contributed to their decision to enter the war. But Germany believed that their torpedoing of the British vessel was warranted. They believed that it was carrying munitions aboard, which they suggested would be received by UK forces. Supporting their theory was the fact that the ocean liner itself had been specifically designed so that it could be converted into a merchant armed cruiser in wartime if necessary. But Britain denied that there were any munitions aboard, as Germany suggested. But many began to call into question the cause of that second explosion. The theories, of course, suggested that the explosions were caused by the weapons that were already being carried on board. Others suggested a steam pipe fracture, a boiler room, and even coal dust as culprits. Despite new alternatives, Germany maintained that their sinking of the Lusitania was warranted, still maintaining that it was carrying weapons that would inevitably be used against them. Their claims, of course, were constantly dismissed until 2019 when the wreckage was investigated. That year, a team of divers deployed an ROV to the wreck site. The ROV showed clear evidence of a vast amount of ammunition in the area of the site. Among some of the debris were .303 caliber casings that were used by the British military amid the First World War. The century-old debate about whether the ocean liner was transporting British war munitions was finally confirmed, and physical evidence supported the claims made by the Germans. Lusitania was, in fact, transporting weapons across the sea, and the crew and passengers were well aware of it. Number 1. The oil industry has never been one to take part in the solution to the ongoing climate crisis. Newly uncovered documents make it glaringly clear. Much like Big Pharma, Big Oil also sought to capitalize on profits no matter what, even if it came down to causing direct harm to the environment. For almost a century, America's leading oil giants were left to line their pockets unchecked. Since the discovery of oil in 1859 and its usefulness, the world has run on that very substance. It gave way to the vehicle industry and electricity production, and is even crucial in the production of certain materials such as plastics and synthetic fibers. There's no doubt that the substance plays an important role in keeping society functioning. For decades, the United States was the main oil supplier that would essentially keep the world running, even if that meant fueling a climate crisis, melting the ice caps, and directly harming all living things on Earth. Big Oil, though, was not about to let anything stand in its way, including protesting conspiracy theorists who argued that they were harming the environment. The industry directly sought to block climate action by denying, lying, and dismissing any claims made against them. The leading businesses would go as far as having false studies written up to suggest that the effects that the oil industry has on the climate are inconclusive. Despite their denial, unrest continued, and many were pointing fingers at Big Oil for being a driving factor of climate change. By 2024, the industry was under attack as newly uncovered documents began to surface. 26 lawsuits were filed by American cities and states, all of which accuse Big Oil of deliberately deceiving the public. The industry was accused of suppressing warnings regarding global warming and climate change. They didn't just stop at denial, though. They went as far as burying their findings of their very own scientists when they didn't align with their narratives. Big Oil would also commission multiple studies that would suggest that their products were not harmful to the planet. These studies, though, still acted against their agenda, so in response, the documents were locked away. In recent years, those hidden results resurfaced, enraging citizens on a global scale. California was the first to press charges against Big Oil. The lawsuit against the corporate giants essentially revealed how the industry was lying to protect their profits. Simultaneously, they were pushing low-emission products, which were still polluting the environment. Years later, Greenpeace would expose one of those oil giants, ExxonMobil, who were secretly working against climate action while claiming to be in support of it, just like Big Oil. New documents further revealed that the industry knew of the harm it was causing to the environment as far back as 1959, despite its denial. In recent years, the industry has stopped explicitly denying that climate change is real and caused by humans. It's shifted to a deception and disinformation strategy, but those lawsuits aren't going away as one of the largest mass manipulation conspiracies that's ever been exposed. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I'll catch you guys in the next video.